So thank you, Patricia, for that warm welcome, and thank you, friends of the library, for giving me the opportunity to take the dust off of a book I haven't read in a while, and I really haven't focused, no pun intended, on this practice that I so love. Little bit busy with a couple other duties, but I thank you for bringing it back. I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a brain scientist. So Lanny, if you ask me really hard questions, I'm going to have to ask you to bring out your drum. So I got a clicker over here. All right. So just to give you an overview of what we'll talk about, I'll give you a little intro to the author, Dr. Fehmi, why I chose this book, a little flavor of what's discussed in the book. I'll take you to a very brief exercise of this open focus technique that Dr. Fehmi developed. I'll give you a little bit of flavor of an area of, that he talks about in the book about types of attention, and suggest who might like this book, and then open it up for Q&A. Okay, so a little bit about Dr. Fehmi. So personally, I should have a picture of him, a very humble man. He was born in 1934, and he departed 2021. But very humble man, gentle man, kind of my kind of people. I love the geeks, you know. I'm very much introverted. It takes a lot for me to be out here. So a lot of meditation gets me to speak in front of you. So he was born of immigrant parents back in New York City. His father was from Turkish Cyprus, and his mom was a German immigrant, and they grew up in New York City. His dad passed when he was 11. So Les wasn't exactly the best reader, the best student, but he was very intrigued in math. Math was his thing. He went on, so someone who wasn't a very good reader went on and got a master's and a PhD in psychology from UCLA, and did his postdoctoral work at the UCLA Brain Research Institute. And again, I'm going to pick on Lanny the whole time, I don't mind, but you know, Lanny's a former vet specializing in monkeys, right? So he did a lot of his research on these, I don't know how you pronounce it, macaw monkeys? And visual perception. So that was one of his research activities. He went on to be a professor at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And back in the 60s, there was a lot of research in EEG science. Everybody know what an EEG is? Kind of measure brain, this little machine. Don't ask me that whole word, because I have to look at my notes. But anyway, and neurofeedback. Has anybody heard of neurofeedback? Anybody familiar? Okay, say like half the audience. Cool. All right, and that was his area of specialty. And studying specifically, there was a lot of studies going on in the alpha brain wave. And on top of that, when brain waves were in sync, so different parts of your brain were in synchrony. So that was kind of his specialty when he was a professor. Well, then it wasn't exactly very popular. I think it kind of ebbed and flowed, and it wasn't very well respected as something being taught in the 60s. But he did make some interesting discoveries about how you pay attention, how it affects your behavior, your body, your physiology, and which led him to develop this open focus training. He left academia and went on to run the Princeton Biofeedback Center. So they call it biofeedback, it's biofeedback for the brain, or neurofeedback, and he was an affiliate member of Princeton University Medical Center. So this went on for almost 40 years. And so during this practice, him and his wife, Susan Shore Fehmi, they not only did neurofeedback, but they also did this open focus practice. There was some talk therapy, so they were psychologists, so they did have some, verbal counseling also as part of that. And then he was, as kind of shy as Les was, he went out on the speaking circuit, and one of the head coaches of the Dallas Cowboys had heard of him and came to Princeton and started studying with Les. So he went out and did some consulting with the Cowboys, New Jersey Nets. He's worked with a lot of different Olympians. He did work with Harvard Mass General, J&J, the VA. He certainly worked with a lot of veterans and PTSD, and even more. And one I didn't mention here, he worked with a lot of golfers. So we having golfers in the audience, specifically the women's PGA. And so this book that he wrote, Open Focus, it was assisted. I don't really talk too much about Jim Robbins. He's the one who wrote the book. He showed up for one of Dr. Fehmi's workshops and was just totally amazed on the work. Certainly it was a topic that Jim was studying. He was an award-winning science journalist, published in the New York Times and several others. So that's a little opening on that, on the author. So why I chose it, so as Patricia mentioned, so I've been really into yoga for 30 years, basically to handle the stresses of everything going on. And one of my children was diagnosed with ADHD when he was in middle school. And I always say, one of us either was going to end up in jail if we didn't get a remedy. So back then, neurofeedback wasn't very prominent, so we went the medicine route, and it worked very well, I have to say, especially during the times where it wasn't football season, because certainly sports really helped to address a lot of the deficiencies, the challenges, I should say, of ADD. I read every book that I could possibly get my hands on, and one of the things also Patricia had mentioned in my yoga studies, there's a place called Kripalu. Anybody ever heard of Kripalu in the Berkshires? Yeah. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on, and I did my advanced training up there, and they introduced us to a lot of things, beyond, the breathing. We did all sorts of meditation. We did heart rate variability. This couple came from Canada, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, and they started talking about neurofeedback. And we had the machines, and it was just very fascinating. But in a group of 54 yoga teacher students, I think me and maybe 2 other people were the only ones interested. Everybody else was sleeping. But it was an exciting science that I had learned about while I was studying up there. And I found that a lot of the benefits, which I'll be talking about, has a very similar benefit to yoga and meditation and other things. Things that, and we'll talk about the alpha brain wave, something that kind of is that relaxed but very attentive attention, something that makes you feel good, feel like you're in the flow. So a lot of the things, I'm sure everybody here has a practice that they do that kind of puts them at ease. It could be, listening to beautiful music. It could be taking a walk out in nature, going to the beach. It could be aromatherapy, etc. Breathing, drumming. Lenny, right? So there's a lot of different modalities that are very similar to open focus, but I will hold it and let you know how I found it very different as well. But common denominators really give me comfort. I don't like to have something that is just like so different than everything. So it was just a nice common denominator for me in the interests. So I did have the opportunity, through many coincidences, and one of the books I read, I just happened to be with a doctor actually going through some EEG diagnosis myself. He had a different machine. It's called a QEEG. And I wanted to find out, how my brain worked. So he gave me, I was not surprised, I did have an ADD diagnosis too. It was kind of minor. I think I probably worked my whole life as a female in a computer science role, I think I've worked very hard to kind of force my focus. But anyway, so I did have a remedy. I actually asked him to give me the medicine that my son took. And while it really helped me zero in on my focus, I felt my heart beating very fast, you know. So I was like, oh, I couldn't. It was like drinking 20 cups of coffee. But for somebody who really needs the medicine, it provides more balance. But anyway, so I asked the psychiatrist there, and I said, what do you think about neurofeedback? Oh, by the way, there's this biofeedback center right there in Princeton where we were, and it was the last paragraph of this book I had with me. So I said, okay, I got to meet this guy. Call up. He just happened to be giving a workshop that following weekend, and so I was able to actually meet him. Before I even read the book, I met him, and first he introduced me to the open focus practice, and then we got into the EEG neurofeedback, and that was with a group of people. So I really thought he was so cool, fascinated by his research. As I mentioned, I do love geeks. My kids always told me I was the keeper of the geek translator at work. And I saw many benefits, not only with me, but other people that were around me, and I'll get into that in a bit. So not many people are aware. Like I said, neurofeedback kind of lost its credibility back in the 70s because there was an overhype of what it could do, that it would provide instant tranquility, you know, and so that was not favored by academia. And if you talk to people who are studying neuroscience, I find like a 50-50 reaction to the neurofeedback. But the good news is there are licensed practitioners, even I think there's one in Bluffton. So it's out there. Some health insurances actually cover neurofeedback. Of course, California and a couple other states. South Carolina isn't one of them. But anyway, so why I chose this book was that if there's anybody here that is not stressed about something, you know, you can go to sleep for the next 40 minutes. But most of really my heart, what I do is really about the younger generation. You know, I care about our generation, but like we have a commitment to really help our current generation, the youth, to get through the trauma, to get through the anxiety, to get through a lot of the distractions that we've developed that they now are immersed in. So, so with all these anxiety issues, distractions, you know, I'd certainly like to help everyone, not just young people, but certainly what kind of gave me a little bit more drive to pursue this certainly was my son, all the friends that he had. Certainly people with ADD have a tendency to have ADD friends. So, and then now being involved with the youth mentoring program, I certainly see the toll that a lot of the challenges of today, especially post-COVID, takes on the youth. So I'd like to bring everyone up to speed on what I know on this topic. Maybe it will help you, and maybe it will help you share it with people in your community, maybe the younger folks as well. When I went to check out what it would take back when I first found out about neurofeedback, there was a place in California. You can go there for 2 weeks and do the practice. They do some talk therapy. It was $10,000 for a 10-day program. It's like, okay, my son's going to stay on medication, and then I found Dr. Fehmi. So it's really not accessible, but the gist of it is, even though if you don't have access to neurofeedback, I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of I love shortcuts, and free shortcuts in the practice. All right. All right, so what does Dr. Fehmi talk about? I'll give you a little bit of what he talks about in the book, of what his research unfolded. So Can anybody guess what year or what decade the EEG machines were developed to monitor your brain? Anybody want to take a guess? 20s. There we go. Okay, Lanny's right. That's only the only time he's right? All right. Yes, you're absolutely right. And in the 20s, the EEG was developed. Also, in the 20s, there was a study on the benefits of alpha brain waves as well as the synchrony. But in the 1960s, when Dr. Fehmi was wanting to do some experimentation with an EEG, it was not available. So what he had to do? What he had to do was design his own. So he designed his own. He hooked it up to an oscilloscope. There's a Bell system term for you, right, Patricia? So hooked it up with an oscilloscope. And his first practice was he went for about 2 weeks. He did 12 25-minute sessions on himself. And really what he wanted to do was to be able to just process more information. It's almost like, you imagine this nerdy guy just wanting to be a computer, right? He wanted to process more information. And so he was doing it, and he was, seeing some alpha, but really what he wanted to see was synchrony, and he wanted to see a high amplitude as well. So he just about gave up. 13th time, he just decided to give up. And if you've ever taken a yoga class, and at the end we do shavasana, and it's kind of like a giving up, and we just kind of surrender. Or if you've just had an experience where you just throw up your hands, you're in a situation, you just kind of give up, and all of a sudden, magic happens. So that's what for Dr. Fehmi, all of a sudden, when he gave up, this was the amplitude that he was looking for on his EEG machine. It's like, okay. So he decided to stay with it. He went on to do some research with NASA. He had a fellowship, and this is not the guy I think would call in sick, right? He's pretty much, nose to the grindstone. And he, again, no pun intended, but he was having a kidney stone issue. He was in so much pain. And what he decided to do was use some of the techniques that he felt. So through this neurofeedback training, he knew when his body was in this high amplitude alpha. So what he did, he's kind of used some concepts to kind of imagine his pain, kind of delve into it, get kind of really immerse himself, and then thought of the concept of diffusing. So he kind of gave himself like these self-guided instructions, and then kind of to dissipate the pain. So as opposed to like hyper-focusing on the pain singly or trying to ignore it, he found this technique of dissolving the pain. So then, so that was another discovery that he made. And then he had some research with some students that were hooked up to EEG machines. And what he wanted to see is that if he gave them like a guided, some kind of sensory experience, could they also generate this alpha, this high amplitude alpha? So he tried aromatherapy, music, having them imagine things like waterfalls, tried all these different options. But when he got to the point where he asked them, can you imagine the space between your eyes? The feedback machine, it would come through light and sound. And then he was able to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. So it was much to do about nothing that he discovered that in this objectless imagery, he was able to invite this person to come into a synchrony in their brain of a very high amplitude alpha. So there was open focus. That was the start of open focus. So imagine, it's really nothing, the nothingness. And we can go on about the meaning of nothing. My friend had wrote a song about the magic of nothing and the space between. Think about music if we didn't have spaces. Think about, beautiful art if we didn't have the spaces. So that's how he discovered the open focus method. I'll get into a couple of different brain functions, ways of paying attention, and then while narrow focus has a purpose, when we're taking an exam or we need to study, or if we're a lion getting our prey, so there's a lot of purposeful reasons to be in open focus, but what we'll talk about is how this open focus will kind of counteract the downside of being in a very fixed hyper-focus. All right. In the book, he'll talk about a lot of different patients that he treated, people from anxiety to pain. There was an autistic young boy that he talks about, PTSD, many different, even relationships. And I'll talk about a little bit about the benefits. Actually, I can talk about it now. Okay, so when I was studying with him, I did 2 3-day workshops. I kind of have had similar feelings when he describes it in the book, that I kind of felt lighter and brighter. So when, after having, and you need to have your eyes closed when you go through this open focus, and it's kind of like meditation, and I always said to Dr. Fehmi, I said, I would call this meditation on steroids. I feel like I've meditated for hours at a clip, in my advanced teacher training, we had to do a lot of various styles and long duration. But I found that this was even more than what I experienced in a regular meditation or yoga class. And he said, so don't use the word meditation because that has an Eastern connotation to spirituality. And he said, think of this open focus as more of a Western scientific version. But to me, almost the same thing. But I kind of feel for me, it was on steroids. And I did get to witness a lot of different people in this workshop that were neuroscience writers, some psychologists, some sports people. And I remember this one guy that came in, he was a physical therapist, and he had open heart surgery a couple years before that. He was in so much pain, he just couldn't get over the pain. I guess they break your chest open, and he was in excruciating pain. He was on painkillers for the longest time. And I remember one session that we sat through that, for me, after we were done, and this was after repeating 25 minutes for several times a day for 2 days, I felt a release in my left hip, almost like I didn't even know I had it. So a lot of trauma anxiety could be stored in your body, and there was no attention to my hip. I was just doing the exercises, and it kind of happened automatically. And for him, he felt this release in his chest, and this grown man started crying. It almost sounds like, now some people might say, okay, now she's getting real woo-woo on me, but I'm just saying that these were the things that I was able to witness in practicing in his place of business. So it was a very humble office, I might say. It was very simple, very humble, and in the book also, he provides these practices that either someone can read to you because you need your eyes closed. There's a CD, if you still have a CD player. I had to go out and buy one. You can play it and he'll read it. He's got a very dry voice. And there's a 15-second pause in between the lines, so there's a purpose for that pause. There's the space between the lines, and it's kind of when, if you're hooked up to an EEG machine, you'll hear this going off like a millisecond later. Okay. So what I'm going to show you, in the intro that Andrew Wyeth, in the intro that Jim Robbins wrote, he recollected, so Dr. Fehmi would have us look at a piece of art. Now, I remember seeing his sister's artwork. She had she loved Japan, so she did a lot of Japanese artwork. But in his session, he took Andrew Wyeth's Christina's World. All right, so I don't know if you're familiar, but just take a few moments to take a look at that. And let me just, I don't know. And what I was going to do, if you don't mind, now if you don't want to do this, that's okay. I'm not going to take you through 25 minutes of it, but I'm going to give you an abbreviated open focus exercise. And I'm going to ask you to sit up nice and tall. If you're used to meditating, usually really know the importance of having a nice posture, lungs open, feet flat on the floor, not the legs crossed. But and then, so in order to have to generate alpha, your eyes need to be closed. This goes back to the that whole vision study, but that's, well, you can Google alpha training and anybody will tell you that you need to have your eyes closed. But again, if you need to leave it open, that's fine. So again, abbreviated. I'll try to turn on my yoga voice here. No. All right, so get nice and comfortable. And we'll take you about through a 10-minute exercise. Can you imagine the distance or space between your eyes? Is it possible for you to imagine the space inside your nose as you inhale and exhale naturally? Can you imagine your breath flowing behind your eyes as you inhale naturally? Can you imagine the space inside your throat as you inhale naturally? Can you imagine the space inside your mouth and cheeks? Is it possible for you to imagine the entire region contained within your tongue? That is, can you imagine the volume of your tongue? Can you imagine the space your teeth and gums occupy? Can you imagine the volume of your lips? That is, can you imagine the space your lips occupy? Can you imagine the space inside your ears? Can you imagine the space between your ears? Can you imagine the distance between your temples? Can you imagine the space between the tip of your chin and the back of your neck? Can you imagine the space between your eyes? Is it possible for you to imagine the volume of your entire jaw? Is it possible for you to imagine that the region around your eyes is filled with space? Can you imagine that as you inhale naturally, your breath fills the entire volume of your face and scalp and head, including your ears and jaws and eyes? Can you imagine that as you exhale and as your breath leaves your body, it leaves your face, scalp, and head empty, that is, filled with space? Can you imagine the volume of your arms, wrists, and hands simultaneously? Is it possible for you to imagine the volume of your thumbs? Can you imagine the volume of your index fingers? Is it possible for you to imagine the space between your thumb and index finger on each hand? Can you imagine the volume of your middle finger on each hand? Is it possible for you to imagine the volume of your ring finger on each hand? Can you imagine the volume of your little fingers? Can you imagine the space between your little finger and your thumb on each hand? Is it possible for you to imagine the volume of all your fingers simultaneously, and at the same time imagine the space between all of your fingers? Can you imagine that as you inhale naturally, your breath fills your entire head, neck, shoulders, arms, hands, and fingers, and that as you exhale and as your breath leaves your body, it leaves this entire region filled with space? While remaining aware of the boundaries between the space inside and outside these regions, can you imagine the space freely permeating and flowing through these boundaries? So now just gently open your eyes, you can wiggle your fingers. All right, you can come back to the picture. You might notice any subtle difference. You may not. This was an abbreviated exercise, as I mentioned. Typically, 25 minutes is the duration. And Dr. Fehmi is probably smacking my hand right now because I didn't ask you, can you imagine to continue the practice these open focus exercises, and your experience will become more vivid and effortless? So can you imagine practicing these exercises at least twice daily? So anyway, that's how he concludes. And if you get a copy of his CD, you'll have access to that. I think there's ways to purchase the MP3s also on the Open Focus website. But anybody want to offer any feedback? No pun intended? Yes.
I'm a retired psychologist, and I used something like that frequently, practically daily. But we didn't call it open focus. It was called systematic relaxation, or something. I use it a lot with patients with anxiety disorders or phobias. That we do the whole body, and we use the word relaxing the muscles, but you did it systematically, starting with the head and going down into the whole body. And then when you knew they were in a state of deep relaxation, you would start to present some of these things. So if they have fear of going over a bridge, let's say, you would first imagine them, tell them to imagine themselves being in a car. And then when they said they were okay with that, then you put them in the driver's seat, and then starting the car. You would just go through a process, and you would pretty much stop at a certain point, and then the next time it was easier for them to get into the car and drive it, to start it, and approach the bridge, etc. And so it was a common practice, and I'm talking about the late 90s. We were doing this. So I think what you were talking about with this Dr. Fehmi is kind of what was already being done, but just giving it a different name and different images.
All right, and if y'all didn't hear, this young lady talked about being a retired psychologist and used a similar imagery. What did you call it?
Systematic
Systematic relaxation. Certain absolutely guided imagery. In Yoga Nidra, we also do that. So yeah, absolutely the concepts. There's so many varieties of this. I think there is such a common denominator. And the difference, oh, go ahead. I want to just hear about your experience. Go ahead.
Well, it's not, I was just going to let you know that there is a 15-minute open focus session led by Susan Shore on YouTube.
Oh, okay, cool. All right.
You know, have a DVD player.
So there is thank you for that. There is a 15-minute open focus available on YouTube by Les's wife, Susan Shore, Fehmi. And yeah, so thank you for that. Susan did continue his practice after Les passed away. And in fact, she completed his third book called Living in Open Focus. They also co-wrote Dissolving Pain. So thank you. Any other reactions to the, go ahead.
My headache that's been brewing since 3 a.m. is gone.
Oh, yeah, it's a miracle. No, that's awesome. That's, oh, I'm sorry. Her headache that's been brewing since when? 3 a.m. is gone. Yeah, no, that's, yeah, so, go ahead. No? No. Did anybody see the picture any different? Oh, you saw a moving picture. Interesting. I don't have a medical or physiological explanation, but lighter and brighter. Go ahead, Bruce. More dimension, aura. Yeah, a lot of people say that, they looked at the foreground, and then after they did the open focus, they were able to see the whole picture. That's another one. But no, interesting, the aura. Yeah. Any other sharing? Okay, yeah. So that was pretty cool. I'm glad that we're able to at least notice how we're paying attention. Where's my little clicker? Did I leave my clicker? Anyway, so what I wanted to talk about next, somehow clicker's hiding in the dark here. All right. Oh, okay. So in the book, he does the full, what we just did was an abbreviated head and hand open focus. And it was cute. I remember Mrs. Fehmi describing, does anybody know what this part of our body is called? The space between the finger, the pointer and the thumb. You ever hear the term perlicue? So she taught me that. And there's some, I think, kind of extra special connection to the brain. Because as you know, our fingers, the finger movement connects to the brain. So if we were hooking you all up to neurofeedback, a lot of the feedback does come from here. I get it in the throat. It seems like everybody gets it with the eyes. And they do a dissolving pain exercise and a heart-centered open focus. So that might be nice for someone for Valentine's Day to read to your loved one. All right. So just real quick, I know we're kind of going about 10 minutes, 9 minutes left, and I want to allow you time for questions. But in the book, Dr. Fehmi talks about the 4 different types of attention. And again, not to judge or not to say that any of these are wrong. In fact, we need all these different types of attention to exist. In diffuse immersed, that's something from sleeping to meditation, being unself-conscious, your body's at rest. Those are the delta and the theta lower brain waves. For diffuse objective, Dr. Fehmi describes it as like a symphony sensory experience, like a panoramic view. So that might be some of your shifts. To be able to be objective about your sensations, but having diffuse awareness of the space. And so how many you play in a band, any musicians? Okay, we've got a couple. So that feeling of kind of knowing what you're doing, but being in this big symphony, kind of being in the flow, being in the zone. Narrow immersed, I don't know, to me it's like eating a piece of chocolate, being immersed in a very amplified, narrow focus to be intense and savor the experience. An enraptured thinker, he says, being a recipient of a deep massage. So being kind of narrow but immersed in the focus. And then lastly, which Dr. Fehmi maintains that we probably spend way too much time, and I'd probably agree, would be narrow objective, a lion stalking prey, this emergency, taking a college exam, obsessing on work, to narrow focus away to deny an emotional problem, and being this self-conscious mind and body, and highly toned. So from sleep to stress, and this is in his book. And then here's a little, need to put on your sunglasses for this. My yellow didn't look like that. But anyway, so if you're looking at what frequencies are associated with these focuses, you have more of a lower, like I mentioned, the delta and the theta. On the diffuse immersed, it's more, and then in the, well, I'll go down the diffuse, more right brain dominant. I know we have plenty of artists. My neighbor Donna out there being the artist, the right brainer Donna, having more increase of whole brain synchrony, meaning when the different parts of your brain are in that same frequency. Low arousal, meaning like not easily agitated. And then for your central nervous system, it's more you're kind of in more of a parasympathetic or stimulation. For the middle two, both diffuse objective and narrow immersed, they're more the middle EEG frequencies, the alpha. Your brain balance is pretty much both right and left. There's a moderate whole brain synchrony and moderately aroused, and somewhere between, kind of like in the middle. I like to be in the middle. Well, usually find me in the middle on most stuff. But anyway, narrow objective are the higher frequencies, beta. And it's kind of funny that Dr. Fehmi never talked about gamma, but gamma is even higher than beta, and the high IQ people, beta. That's why I have my grandchildren call me gamma, because I'd like to be gamma. And so for the Lara, although I have to say, I'm totally left brain. Computer science, math, all that kind of stuff. The brain synchrony is much reduced, and in narrow objective focus, you have a high arousal, fight or flight, which is the stimulation of your sympathetic system. So you'll find this in the book. All right, so who might like this book? So again, studying the science is not for everybody. Like the 3 people in my yoga training that were interested versus the 51 that weren't, who might be interested. People who are like yourself in psychology, wellness, self-help. I just love every self-help book before I got into the neurofeedback. But who can benefit by these exercises? Certainly those with ADHD, ADD, pain, anxiety, PTSD, phobias, sleep disorders. Real quick, there was a woman who came to our workshop from Kazakhstan. She had agoraphobia. So doing the exercises back in her home country, she finally found the balance and the confidence and the relaxation to be able to get on a plane and fly to see Dr. Fehmi in person and take one of the workshops together. So I had the pleasure of touring her through Princeton. We used to go on these long walks on the Delaware-Raritan Canal after our open focus and admire all the trees and stuff. And then athletes, I didn't talk too much about his athletic training, but those who really want to be in the zone, I don't know what the golf term is of choking up at the bat, but I've certainly seen people choke up at the bat. But the thing is, as an athlete, you want to have your muscles relaxed, but be alert enough to pay attention. Olympians, as I said, certainly students, artists, executives, and really anybody who's willing to spend the time. I'd say most people aren't willing to dedicate the 25 minutes, but we saw with the 10, that did a little bit, that is worth doing the exercise. So the cool thing is, it's a do no harm type of practice, which I like. And unlike the medicine that my son took, once it was out of his system, we were back in the same dysfunction or ADHD. On this practice, it is, if you're doing an intense, for 2 weeks or whatever, you just do like a slight maintenance. You don't, it sticks. Once you train your brain gets used to how that alpha frequency feels in your body as well. So that's all I had, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you took away at least to know and to remind yourself to flex your attention and pay attention to how you're attending. And hopefully you can, if your daily life isn't as effortless as you'd like it to be, from, waking, getting dressed, et cetera, I find I can cook easier. I have more, I don't know, there's something about my cooking that's different after I do my open focus. I haven't asked the recipients, but my grandkids were eating a lot more the other day. And relationships more loving in time for Valentine's Day. And so, and then rather than letting our emotions to reside in our body and generate resistance, we can kind of manage our emotions. So as Annette, sorry, I was saying Alexander again. As Annette said, the book is available out front. Proceeds, or all the sales of the books are going to go to our nonprofit that I serve on the board for the Extra Mile Club of the Low Country. It's a mentoring program. We have over 100 kids, a lot of at-risk students as well. And we do a mentoring program, sports, leadership, mentoring. So that will all go to Extra Mile Club. And what's left, if Bruce doesn't mind, I'll have available at your bookstore and however you want to make available. But the sales would go to EMC. And you go to openfocus.com for more information. There is a copy of it in now the library. And let me see if you have any questions. Go ahead, Carter.
Has this benefited people with memory issues?
Has this benefited people with memory issues? There is mention that people have benefited from memory. Funny thing is, I don't remember exactly. Again, it's not going to do everything for you, but certainly by paying attention, like where you left your keys, things like that, and, relaxing your body and taking the breath, and, I think that will help with memory too. So I assume so, but any other questions? All right. So I think I have cards out. If anybody wanted to send me any emails, I do have one of Dr. Fehmi's EEG machines at home that, I tuned it up and everything. It still works. So if anybody's interested in a little bit more about the neurofeedback, it's for entertainment purposes. I had said, Dr. Fehmi, what am I doing with this? How, I'm not a doctor. He says this is purely for entertainment purposes, because you'll see, like Deepak Chopra has something similar. You can buy these devices, these entertainment devices, through a lot of different companies, especially now with AI. Forget it. It's, it's available. All right. Thank you, everyone.